In August of 1991, the Streets of Rage series was born. Originally released in Japan as Bare Knuckle, it was a side-scrolling beat-em-up starring 3 former cops battling the evil and corruption of the Syndicate, a powerful crime organization with its hands in every part of the city's government and police force. Its arcade-inspired gameplay had genre staples like 2-player co-op and special attacks, but what really set this apart from similar games was the incredible techno-inspired soundtrack that was composed by industry juggernaut Yuzo Koshiro. It set a somber mood of darkness in the opening and then jammed out in each and every stage as you whooped ass and distributed your own brand of justice. The game was an incredibly positive piece of my childhood, and a game I still play often today. With the first game commanding high praise from gamers and critics alike, Sega jumped back in the saddle and developed Streets of Rage 2, which first showed up in December of 1992. While Sega CS had designed the first game in-house, Streets of Rage 2 was a huge project that took multiple teams working together to complete. Sega CS took the lead, while Ancient, HIC, Shout Design Works, and MNM Software all contributed. The end result was a game with radically improved visuals and animation, lots of additions to the gameplay, more characters, bigger stages, and an equally thrilling soundtrack that once again set it apart from the other stuff in the beat-em-up genre. It was at a level few home games could ever hope to reach in 1992, essentially an authentic arcade experience in every way. As the Genesis entered its twilight years, we would get the third and final 16-bit entry in the series, Streets of Rage 3. Released in March of 1994, it further built on the advances of the second game, now with even more animation, new playable characters, and more gameplay additions. While my friends and I debated the appeal of the new direction of the soundtrack, we all agreed it played great and it was yet another must-own entry in the series. The other thing we all agreed on was that Sega of America should have left the port alone, and not messed with the story or difficulty, 2 areas the Japanese version was quite a bit more appealing in. When the Sega Saturn launched in Japan later that year in 1994, my mind was racing with all the possibilities. It was clear Sega wanted to leverage its 3D arcade games, but it also had a ton of popular Sega Genesis IPs to bring over to its new 32-bit monstrosity. The future was bright and full of potential, and in those early days that excitement was a hell of a powerful thing. The months and years would roll on, however, and Sega would leave behind many of those IPs untouched, unevolved, and unreleased. You heard about a few projects here and there that could have been a Streets of Rage game, but nothing materialized beyond magazine gossip and speculation. I honestly couldn't believe Sega didn't make a stronger effort to get a Streets of Rage sequel on the Saturn. I mean, the friggin' blueprint to an awesome 32-bit beat-em-up was staring them right in the face. Huge branching storylines with RPG elements and 3D engines that focused on theme areas to do battle. I mean, it was all right there on their own system. The genre had begun to lose popularity around that time, but only due to lack of innovation, something that the successful 32-bit brawlers had actually put some effort towards. The Sega Saturn would come and go with no entry into the Streets of Rage series, a sad and awful truth that still hurts to this very day. Those dark days had been tough, but with the announcement of the Sega Dreamcast came newfound hope for the Streets of Rage series. No longer was Sega to be held back by complicated designs or fear of its legacy. Surely they had learned the lesson of why the Saturn had not worked in the West, and I was once again looking forward to seeing what Sega had in store for us. It looked bright in the beginning too. Sega got a brand new 3D Sonic game ready, rebuilt its Sega Sports brand back up from the ashes, and you started to see whispers of classic IPs coming back, like Phantasy Star, Echo the Dolphin, Chaka the Forever Man, Toe Jam and Earl, Thunder Force, and yes, it was even rumored that Streets of Rage 4 itself was in development. Surely this time we would get a new game in the series, especially with all the new power under the hood of the Dreamcast. As you guys know, many of the games in development for the system were never released, and unfortunately Streets of Rage was yet another casualty of Sega's troubles. Like the Saturn, the Dreamcast would come and go with no entry into the Streets of Rage universe. It had been over 6 years by this point, and things were looking pretty damn bleak. Fast forward a few years to 2003, when a group of individuals decided enough was enough and it was time for Streets of Rage to make a comeback. If Sega didn't recognize the potential of the series enough to make a new game, these folks decided they'd just do it themselves. And so it was that the Streets of Rage Remake project was started. Bomber Gamesoft would be the group's name, and they set out on a journey to take the Streets of Rage we knew and loved and completely remake it with new graphics, story elements, and tons of extras. The project was huge and spanned years worth of updates, changes, tweaks, and additions. The end result was one of the finest independently produced games I've ever seen or played, and it's high time we took a look at it. Firing up Streets of Rage Remake sees a new opening cinema explaining the story, a close representation to the original games set to music that is done respecting the original sound and feel of the first two games. This was immediately gripping, different enough to get you excited for what you were about to see, and familiar enough to make you feel like what you were playing was a legitimate entry into the franchise, and really does set the tone for everything you're about to experience. Not content with simply copying what Sega had done before it, Bomber Gamesoft would add a ton of extras before you even started the damn game. It had the expected 1 and 2 player modes, but it also has a CPU friend co-op mode where a computer controlled ally helps you in your fight. As if that weren't cool enough, you also get to set the AI behavior of this ally, from dumb as a box of rocks to an aggressive killing machine that steals all your points. There's also a shop where you can spend those points you accrue during the game. This opens up things like cheats, extra characters, extra modes, and even crazy stuff like exploding enemies. This adds loads of replay value in and of itself, and you'll need to clock some serious playtime to open it all legitimately. There's also additional modes like character battles, survival, boss rush, and volleyball. For you creative types, there's even a few game editor modes where you can create new scenarios or change around the existing game. The options menu is loaded with stuff to mess around with too. You can set the difficulty and change your lives like the old games, but you can also set the game to behave like your preferred Streets of Rage entry. I encourage you to play around with these settings, especially if you prefer Streets of Rage 2 over Part 3. Rounding out the additions is a pile of audio options and a miscellaneous area which further allows you to change the game based on preferences. You can even change it to bare knuckle remake if you were so inclined. Starting a new game allows you to choose one of 6 fighters, basically every main hero from the first 3 games. You get Axel, Blaze, Skate, Zan, Max, and the very welcome return of Adam. There are additional unlockable combatants, but I'll leave those for you to discover. Streets of Rage Remake was developed for play on the PC platform, and although this afforded the chance to dazzle you with fancy new graphical effects, it actually stays pretty close to the original games. You kinda get the vibe that this could have been what the games would have looked like if they had been developed for the Sega CD or 32X. In other words, better than a stock Genesis, but not so far above it as to change the look and feel of the world and its characters. You get some great new art spread out to liven up the world a bit. Windows will reflect you and your enemies, shadows have been improved significantly, and effects like transparencies have been added to spruce up the presentation. As good as it looks, it never strays far from its inspiration. Characters look very much like their Sega Genesis sprites, and while the animation has been bumped up a few notches, it never looks out of place or foreign to the game world. The developers even resisted the temptation to go overboard with a bunch of color enhancements, keeping in line with the gruff, darker palettes you know so well. The bottom line here is that while this game was developed well after Sega left the hardware market, it feels very much like something that would have been designed and released in the 1990s. If you are a fan of 2D art like me, this is nothing short of a beautiful experience. Of course, one of the driving factors of the Streets of Rage appeal is the unforgettable soundtracks. The first two games were epic to the point of legendary status, and Bomber Gamesoft knew not to mess with a good thing. Fortunately for us, they also knew they needed to add their own spin to it, and what is present here is the kind of shit that sends shivers down your spine when you hear it. It's equal parts nostalgia, art, ambiance, and emotional power that will pull you back to your childhood, reigniting your love of everything that was right with the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive originals. While you are playing, you will have no choice but to nod your head along to its beats and rhythms, or just jump in and dance like nobody is watching. This OST is so good, it doesn't just do the original work justice, it's worth separating from the game, adding it to your car and phone, and rocking to it every chance you get. If you are a Sega fan and don't have this, hang your head in shame and rectify this error immediately. As good as the graphics and sound presentations are, the homage paid to the gameplay here is perhaps the most incredible part of this project. Again, not just happy with copying what had already been done, these developers chose to add lots of new little touches to make the game fun and exciting again. A new upgrade system is in place, giving you the ability to gain additional attacks that carry more damage potential. This is represented by the star system. Stay alive and kick ass and you gain a star, giving you an upgraded special attack. Get killed and you fall back a star, losing your newfound power and needing to work back up to it. Gameplay additions don't stop there, as there are now routes that you can choose at the start of the game. These will take you along varying paths that cover pretty much every stage from all three games. To put it simply, the sheer volume of choice here is shockingly deep. Again, not some simple rehash of the original content, but a completely remixed adventure with new cinemas, art, and even enemies. There are even branching paths inside these different routes for even more choice, skyrocketing replay value well beyond the hacks available on the Sega Genesis today. You'll need a good 8 to 10 playthroughs to see every single new piece of content here, and that doesn't count the unlockables. I hear the term passion project thrown around a lot, but what was accomplished here is to be envied and praised. This team took something they loved, stayed true to its vision, and added their own touch, creating a game that all of us could be proud of. Sitting here and playing through this again a few times just brings those memories flooding back of how much I love these games and just how much I appreciated this effort for giving me even more of it. The people involved knew Streets of Rage as well as I did, respected it as much as I did, and pumped years of their lives into doing it all justice. I'd like to thank each and every one of you involved, truly, as a fan of Sega, as a fan of good games, and as a fan of hard work and dedication. You guys rock, and you have my eternal gratitude. I imagine that there are some of you out there that have yet to play this. Perhaps you didn't know about it, or maybe you thought it was just another Streets of Rage hack you could live without. Do yourself a favor and find it. Sega issued a takedown request in 2011 in order to protect its IP, which I can't hate on too much and I do understand, but that means you need to put in a bit of effort to find it. The good news is that it still plays great on Windows 10, and picked up and used my Xbox One controller with no issues. It also has an overall easy to set up and play interface, so no mad PC skills are needed to enjoy it. Recognizing the work that went into this is really important, I feel. It's a monument to the great works done by many talented people, created by people who were true fans of that work. If I have the ear of anyone at Sega, after your Streets of Rage 4 project comes and has its day, you may want to consider buying and porting this to the modern Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox platforms. It wouldn't just win you some brownie points with the Sega faithful, but it might just corral you an entirely new audience looking for something that is undeniably worth playing. Who knows, you might just light a fire under the asses of those naysaying former Sega fans that claim the old Sega is dead and gone. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.